God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Lynn Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business podcast. Well, welcome to the Repurposing Business podcast. I'm delighted to have Phil Cunningham with me. Phil, see lots of things in the background. Where are you today?
Oh, Brett, thank you. And firstly, thanks for having us on your podcast. It's really exciting to be part of it. So today I'm broadcasting or coming to you from Cape Town at the Sunrise Animation Studios in Cape Town.
Fantastic. Excellent. Now, were you born in Cape Town? Is that where you grew up?
No, my story is slightly different. I was actually born in Zimbabwe, and that's where the whole story side of things was actually birthed, Brett. I don't know if you want me to go there now, but to answer your question, I was born in Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, Phil, I've often heard you make mention of your parents, that they were people of faith and they somehow stirred you up to faith. Tell me a bit about your parents. What's their story?
Yeah, no, the most amazing people. My mom's passed on now. My dad's still alive. He still lives in Zimbabwe. Yeah. But they had the most incredible partnership. Firstly, their life and their work was typically marriage work and family work. And they traveled a lot through Africa, just really building into families, because their passion obviously was Jesus, was God. But at the cornerstone of society is the family unit. And so that was their passion. And they really complemented each other well. My mom was a very energetic, very vibrant, charismatic person. And I remember saying to my brothers and I, when we were like in our teenage years, Phil, Andrew, Peter, when David was your age, he was killing Goliath and he was fighting giants. Like, what are you guys doing? So they were just amazing, because they were always like, the teenage years are the best years of your life. This is where God moves and he connects and he... Yeah. So this whole thing of teenage years are bad, they were like, no, teenage years are amazing. Yeah. And they were really always encouraging us to follow God's call in our life, whatever adventure he had for us. We're all obviously different individuals, but what was really amazing about them was just trying to let God flow and work in our lives. And they were amazing. My dad still is amazing character. Yeah.
Sounds like they modeled for you what they asked you to do, right?
Yeah, they did. They lived by faith. They stretched boundaries. They went out on a limb, and they really lived their life through faith in Jesus, like in an incredible way. Yeah. Yeah.
Were they farmers? Did you grow up in an agricultural setting? What did that look like?
Okay,
Zimbabwe, was that Rhodesia back in the day? Is that what it was when your parents were there?
Yeah. I mean, 1980 was independence. We had turned into Zimbabwe. So I grew up more in Zimbabwe, but was born when it was still Rhodesia. And although my dad was in full-time Christian work and traveling a lot through Africa, we were very connected to the agricultural world, because all of my mom's brothers were on farms and we actually had a farm as well. So much of our life was spent growing up on farms and in really beautiful farms, like just massive ranches, no electricity, just wide expanse where you could just really take in the African vista.
Yeah, fantastic. So you and your brothers grew up, and then you went to university in Harare, is that right?
No, and just to mention, I've got an amazing sister as well. The reason she didn't come up in the first conversation was because she's 10 years younger than me, and I'm the youngest of three brothers. So when we were in teenage years, she was still a little girl, but she's now doing amazing work for God in Zimbabwe. Actually, she still lives in Zimbabwe.
So 4 kids. Amazing.
So I grew up in Zimbabwe, and then we went to university. My brothers actually went to university across in the United Kingdom. I went on a rugby tour there and experienced the weather. And I was like, I can't go to university in the United Kingdom. So I went to university at Pietermaritzburg University in South Africa. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Great. So what did you go to study?
So interesting enough, Brett, I'm sure we'll get onto movies and storytelling later, but I'll just give a quick preempt now, because I went to university to study agriculture. But the one thing I'll say, which maybe we'll rewind back to, I'm sure you will, but was as I grew up, I loved storytelling. So every weekend I'd take a notebook like this one, Take my pen and I just draw like graphic novel style stories. I just love storytelling. But no one in our family was vaguely connected to the media world or the arts world. We all went and studied agriculture. So that's what I did. I went to university and I studied agriculture.
Yeah, yeah. And then what happened to the desire for stories, or this? How did that evolve then?
No, that's an amazing question. So firstly, one amazing thing happened while I was studying agriculture was that I met my wife, Jackie.
Okay.
And that was incredible and still is incredible 30 years later. But why I mention her at this point, because she's a critical part of the journey of how we got into movie business. But while I was at university studying agriculture, I was just struck by the power of movies. And if you're from a few square kilometers in Hollywood, this incredible, like in Africa, just this incredible power and influence it had on society, the way people shaped their morals, their thinking, for good or bad, by the way. Like sometimes movies were great. They were inspiring people to be brave and courageous and go the extra mile. And other times it was eroding marriage and morality. And, so there's quite a mixture. But what did strike me for good or bad was the power of story. And for me, story is like a Trojan horse. What I started to see at university, it's like this Trojan horse that gets under people's defense mechanisms and plants a seed for good or bad. And I was like, wow, this movie industry is incredible. But I was still at university and left that and started my own agricultural business.
Yeah.
And Brett, I'm getting to your answer, but just quickly to say that business took off. It was going brilliantly. Yeah. And then, but Jackie, my wife, was like, Phil, I know inside you there's this dream to make movies, to tell stories. Why don't you do that? And I was like, are you sure this is going to be? So we had read a saying, Brett, that said, an eagle that chases two rabbits both get away. So we actually shut down our agricultural business, which was really booming. And we decided to go into the film business. And that's what we did while we were still living in Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And was Jackie also from Zimbabwe or from South Africa?
No, so that's why I was glad I did not go to the United Kingdom for university, because I wouldn't have met Jackie. So she's was born in South Africa, but we went back to Zimbabwe straight after university and spent like over 10 years in Zimbabwe. And she's probably more Zimbabwean than I am in some way. She loves the country, loves the culture, loves the people. Yeah, so she's Zimbabwean by marriage, effectively.
Yeah. So she's a Southern African. Fantastic. Well, it's great that she stirred this up in you, because such a big deal to have a wife who calls you out, right?
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. We often don't understand it, but in Hebrew, the word for a helpmeet, I grew up in South Africa, and helpmeet sounded like kitchen help, But there's two Hebrew words, Eitzah Keneged, which means equal and more powerful ally. And so that's, every other time that word is used, it's talking about God. So it's quite amazing how God makes a wife who stands in front of us, gets in our face, calls us out, and encourages us to be all we should be. So sounds like you got yourself a good woman.
Amazing. Definitely.
Fantastic. So you're back in Zimbabwe, and just to echo your point about the influence, you see, I have a friend who started a nonprofit, and what she would do was take people to different parts of Africa. So she took some rappers. These were not people of faith. These were, you know what rap music is like sometimes. And she took them to Mozambique, and they were in a village walking past a hut, and these guys heard their music blasting out from the hut with the choice lyrics,
Yeah.
And they said to her, we had no idea, and we have to clean up our lyrics. We can't be doing this.
Actually,
yeah, it's amazing that point of influence. But now you're not in Hollywood, you're in Zimbabwe. So what was your first foray into making a movie, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I just had this. So Jackie and I talked, and we were like, okay, we're going to make movies. But we didn't have a clue where to start, Brett. And I met one of my good friends at university in a bank one day in Zimbabwe, and he had just put on this amazing play or theater production at the Seven Arts in Harare. And I was blown away by it. It was a great production. And so we were just standing there, and we were waiting in the queue, and I said, what are you doing? He said, I've just done this play. And we kind of said, well, why don't we make a movie together? So we didn't know what it was going to be or how we were going to do it, but we decided to make a movie. And at that stage, there were two things that happened. One, I was passionate about animation because of its power to cross race, cultural, age, and gender barriers just so powerfully. And the other thing on the street art, and this was more his idea than mine, to be honest, but the street art in Zimbabwe, there's some beautiful street art, but it's all made out of rubbish, pieces of wire and copper and plugs and toothbrushes. And they make these beautiful characters, which they sell on the edge of the street. Yeah. So Roger Hawkins, who's the guy I was talking to, is like, Phil, why don't we take that concept of making these beautiful characters out of junk and we'll make it a stop frame animation movie like Wallace and Gromit or Shaun the Sheep in that vein of animation. And so I was like, great idea, let's do it. So we decided to do it. And I had written a book called The Legend of the Sky Kingdom, which is a bit like Pilgrim's Progress. At the center of it, though, is Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So at the center of that story, it's got the road as a person and by faith, believing and seeing. So we took that story, we converted it into a movie script. We knew so little about movie script craft, if I can say that we wrote one script, no storyboards, straight into production. And Jackie and I actually funded that movie ourselves out of the agricultural business. And so we actually made, Brett, Africa's first animated feature film, The Legend of the Sky Kingdom in Zimbabwe.
Is this thing still around? Can we find it on YouTube somewhere?
Yeah, so it's on YouTube. You just go type in The Legend of the Sky Kingdom and it's there. Interestingly enough, Brett, we won some great awards at all the art festivals and all that. And I thought, sure, this movie business is easy. But we didn't make 1 cent because we didn't understand commercializing a movie. And also, we didn't understand yet story craft very well in a movie. So it's got a beautiful charm and a beautiful DNA, I still think. But it was our school fees, basically, in getting into the film industry. Yeah.
So you became an artist. You did wonderful work and didn't get a penny.
I didn't get any money for it.
Fantastic. So now you've transitioned, you've had a bit of a baptism into the world of movies out of agriculture. Fantastic. And so that was your first one. You did that. Yeah. And at what stage did Jungle Beat develop? And what is Jungle Beat and how did that evolve? Tell us a bit about that, because that's just amazing.
Yeah, so model animation, by the end of that movie, I was like, wow, there's got to be a better way to do animation than model animation, because it's incredibly laborious and difficult, but it's got its own beauty and charm. It's a beautiful craft and medium. But at the same time, I was becoming fascinated with CGI animation, computer-generated animation, just because whatever you can imagine, you can then do. Like CG animation's just you can go wherever your imagination can go. So Jungle Beat started actually as a test. I was working with our director, Brent Dawes, and I said, let's do a test to see if we can do CGI animation. So we found a few guys, we got a few computers together, and he wrote this little script about a monkey called Always Take the Weather With You. Yeah. And in that script, he tried to get this monkey to encounter snow and wind and floods. Yeah. But it ended up just being so funny as a short. It was never meant to be, that we were like, this is great. And I was at a film festival in France, in Annecy, and I showed this little short to some buyers there. And they were like, this is great. Have you got more of this? And I just said, absolutely, even though we hadn't yet started anymore. I phoned Brent. I said, Brent, we need more of these. So that was actually the birth of Jungle Beat. It was actually an experiment. But basically, at the heart of Jungle Beat is friendship, kindness, and it's all these little jungle characters like monkey and an elephant and a rhino and a giraffe and their adventures. And Brett, it just took off from there. I mean, I'll dive in and tell you a little bit about the brand now, what it's grown to be.
Before you go into that, I want to let you know that I saw that way back. In fact, they used to play it on the airplanes, as you'll recall. Yes. It was one of the shorts that they played. And I don't know what, that seemed to be a long, long time ago, like in the early 2000s or something. I forget when it was.
2000.
And it was about the time that we were bringing some first teams into Cape Town and so forth. And we used to share that. You take the weather with you liberally with people. And it was fascinating. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so
such a lovely little piece, you know.
It all started from that little seed. I mean, today it's grown to be a big brand. On YouTube, we've got 8.5 million subscribers. Wow. We get over 100 million views a month onto our YouTube channel. And we actually made Jungle Beat the movie, was our first animated feature film, which we released on Netflix last year in March in the US. And Brett, that movie did so well, which was quite unexpected because the budget wasn't huge. And it is actually in the top 10 in Netflix for 14 days, live action and animated films on Netflix in the US. And on the back of that success, we're now in the production of Jungle Beat, the movie 2. And we also continue to create more Jungle Beat episodes. So Jungle Beat's grown into its own beautiful brand, which has got its own charm and voice. But it's amazing. It started in 2003 and it's just kept growing and growing over the years.
Yeah.
Something bigger. And
Yeah, fantastic. And did you have any connection with that company Character Matters way back? Do you remember that?
No, so actually our origin was fairly similar and close, because the guys who we experimented with, they later were the guys who, when we actually both moved to Cape Town at the same time. And we'd done Always Take the Weather With You, which was our script, and we funded it. But some of the guys who'd done the CG work, they came to Cape Town and started their own little company called Character Matters. So they went on and did some of their work, and Sunrise went on and did some of their work. But I knew them well. And unfortunately, the company is not still going today, but I knew the guys well. And some of them have gone on into the animation industry in other companies, actually. But Character Matters itself, it didn't carry on in the end. But we knew each other,
Yeah, a couple of their guys went through our Repurposing Business consultation in September 2005.
Oh, wow. Okay. And some of them, carried on, and they carried on into the animation industry and are doing very well in the animation industry today.
Fantastic. Great. So what's nice about Jungle Beat is in not the movie, but in your shorts, there's no words, there's no language barrier, as you said. But the kids, the people can even the adults, we can understand what's going on without words. That's fascinating, right?
Yeah, and it's what's fascinating about that is it's all non-dialogue. All the episodes are non-dialogue. But what that does train you to do is it makes you fit at telling story effectively, because you can't get lazy and rely on dialogue. So interesting, what it's trained us to do is like a really good gym workout, the whole Jungle Beat brand, because your story craft has to get sharper and sharper and sharper. Right. And movies like series like Tom and Jerry are amazing. They've got no dialogue, but their storytelling is just so brilliant. It keeps you engaged. And I think what Jungle Beat's so good about, the fact that it's no dialogue, it's all over Asia, it's all over the world. It travels very easily, but it's also taught us to be better storytellers, to be honest. It's really made us learn the skill of storytelling.
Fantastic. Now, for your first feature-length movie, is that also non-dialogue, or what happened there?
No, so that one we got into dialogue. We thought a whole animated feature film with no dialogue.
Let's hear from Nezzy in person for a moment.
There's some examples, like Pixar did a movie called Wall-E, and a lot of that is non-dialogue, although there is dialogue. But we thought, no, it's time to get into dialogue, and we wanted to anyway. So that movie, there's an alien invasion basically into the jungle, and they bring a speech pod. So there's a story reason why the animals suddenly start to speak. But we got into dialogue, and it's a full-length feature film, and I think the dialogue worked really well in a feature film context.
My wife and I went to watch Downton Abbey last night, the movie, and it involves using the facility, their home, their mansion. Back to our conversation with Sally for a movie, but partway through they go from silent movies to talkies, as they call them, and they had to deal with the transition. Because back in the day when you watched the movie, the band played up front, and occasionally some text.
But it is amazing how that forces you to think about your storytelling, to be effective, and to not waste. Like, you can't get lazy and just lean on dialogue, which actually it's a good discipline actually to learn as a storyteller. Not
sure how well this goes down in marriage counseling, though, getting back to what your parents did, because there's a lot of silent husbands out there,
This is one of the problems, is communication. Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so Jungle Beat is working. You've been doing commercial work as well, I know, using your animation for well-known things, rugby teams, football clubs, other things. So you've got a legitimate business that's surviving. It's not just, maybe one day I want to do something. You've now got a legitimate business. And Phil, transition us into what you're working on now, a full-length animated movie that's not quite a Jungle Beat
Yes.
type situation. What is that all about?
Yeah, maybe let me go back to the beginning, because it all goes back to Zimbabwe, actually, where what you're talking about. So we're busy making an animated feature film on David, which is, the life of David from the Bible. And he's just one of history's most incredible, colorful, energetic characters, So when I was back in Zimbabwe, though, and spending time canoeing, there's a river I loved up there called the Zambezi River. Yeah. And out on that river, you could just go for days without seeing a human being. And I think that's where I really connected with God personally. Like, where it became a personal thing for me, watching a thunderstorm or an elephant charging or a little flower on the riverbank. I was like, God's character is just so beautiful. Like,
I saw more hippos on the Zambezi River.
Yeah, there's a lot of hippos.
Little flowers.
Yeah, and crocs and everything.
Yeah,
you see the wild side of God as well in the Zambezi. Yeah. And actually, jokes aside, that's one thing I saw was like C.S. Lewis says, he's a lion, but he's not a tame lion. So out in nature, I counted this character who was just larger than life, adventurous, expansive, and not boring. Let me put it to that way. So when I got to university, and I was just talking to some of my friends about the God I knew, and many of them were like, "Oh, Phil, their view of God, if at all, was this like boring, angry, austere figure." And I was like, "I don't think you actually understanding who God is. It's not the God I understand, And at that time, I was also reading in Acts. It said, "I found in David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart." So I started to sow a seed in my mind while I was at university, because I was just getting into the whole movie watching, and I was like, "This is amazing." It's like, imagine if we could tell a movie on the life of David, it could give people a glimpse into God's heart, like a window into God's heart. So in my mind at that stage, Brett, I was still at university thinking about movies like that came out later, like Braveheart, Gladiator. That's kind of what I had in my mind for David. But that's where the seed came from, was canoeing down the Zambezi, connecting with God, reading David's story, and just being so inspired by the way he lived expansively and adventure, and realizing that's connected to God's heart. It became a passion of mine more than 20 years ago to tell a story on David. So everything we've been doing as a film company has actually kind of been building towards that dream, of building our team, building our skill, building our pipeline, our process. And I didn't want to go straight to the David movie because I knew we weren't anywhere near ready. But 20 years later, it feels like we're in the right space to be telling the David movie. I mean, there's lots more to tell, but let me stop there for the moment. Is that making sense?
Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting. Part of the thing that's interesting about this is, for many of us, God speaks to us about something. 2 years later, it hasn't happened, and we say it wasn't God, or I must have missed the boat, or maybe it's never going to happen. I can't trust. But for God, 20 years doesn't seem to be a lot of time building skills, right?
Yeah. Oh, Brett, yeah. No, I was going to dive into what you're saying, but let me let you finish. Yeah.
No, yeah. So tell me some of your struggles in hanging on to the dream when sometimes it looks like you were getting further away from it than closer to it.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I mean, first thing is to say, one thing that struck me, exactly what you've just said. If I look at Joseph, Moses, and David. So Joseph had this dream, and then what happens? He gets sold into slavery. He goes to prison, and it's like, he must have been saying, what happened to that dream I had, Right. And, Moses gets a calling to free his people, and then he ends up in the desert for 40 years. He does make an attempt in his own effort to free his people, which we know goes badly. Yeah. He then is in the desert for 40 years, and he must have been wondering, well, I didn't hear right, or what happened, And David's anointed king, and then he's in the wilderness for 7 years, running from Saul for his life. And it must have been like, what was that anointing all about? And the one thing I learned on our journey is God gives you this dream or this calling or this anointing, and that's amazing. And then you go into the desert, Right. And what I learned for me personally, what God is often doing through those times is he's circumcising our hearts. He's building in a deep humility, a deep connection with him. And I love that verse says it's a circumcision done not by human hands. And, that what I feel often does, it happens in that desert period or that wilderness period or that time after the dream or the calling, is God is really doing something very deep and very real in our hearts. He hasn't forgotten about the dream or the calling, but he brings it back at the right time. We had I had that dream at university. we had so many setbacks, Brett. I mean, if I can say, I think I love Winston Churchill's saying, which is like, success is going from one failure to another without losing enthusiasm. So I was like, yeah. So getting into the film business, it's like, I mean, all businesses are hard. I'm just going to talk about the film business. It was like incredibly hard because I came out of the agricultural world. I had so many connections and contacts, got into the film world and knew nobody. Like people could see, so that journey had so many failures. We could spend your whole podcast talking about how many failures we had, but I'll just say there were many.
Yeah.
And we thought to move from Zimbabwe to Cape Town because Cape Town felt like a better city to try and set up a film company. One example, Brett, we left Zimbabwe, we shut down agricultural business, we put all our furniture and computers from the company, we moved to Cape Town with about, I can't remember, 5 to 8 families. When we arrived in Cape Town, opened the containers and they were completely robbed, except for this like piano that had come from the Second World War in Germany somewhere. Everything else, bicycles, furniture, computers for the company. And we just had all these families looking at us saying, Phil, what have you done? You know? And I was like scratching my head. And what I also hadn't realized.
You led us into the desert to die. We want to go back to Egypt.
100%, yeah. Luckily, they were more gracious than that, the people, but that was kind of what I had done. But we had no cash because I'd shut down the agricultural business, and I had underestimated how hard it would be to start up in a completely new industry, get going. So that was like 2005 right through to the next 10 years were just basically survival. Jungle Beat was lucky helping us survive. It was like manna in the desert, just kept us kind of going and building. But it was 10 years really of cutting our teeth on some hard knocks of life, some hard lessons. And it was only because I think it was such a deep passion to get into the film business. If it was because of just doing a business, I would have shut it down long ago. But the calling and the passion was so deep, it still is so deep, that we continued.
Yeah. One of the things I find about the desert is that you can go into the desert saying, I trust God. When you come out of the desert, it's like, God trusts you because you walk with a limp. You've got the sand in your ears. And I think that's so important. And for God, a decade here, 2, 3, 4 decades, not such a big deal. And so that's amazing. So you were stripped down to the chassis. You arrive in Cape Town. You've got an empty truck and a piano, and then you started from scratch, a little bit by a little bit. At what point did the opportunity to get back into David in your thinking? At what point did that ripen, and how did that happen?
So it's probably, David was always in our mind. I was always obviously kept it close, but there was nothing happening because we were in survival mode. We were doing commercials. We connected with sports brands, and we were doing actually that started to grow quite nicely, Brett. We did some work for Juventus, for English rugby, for Welsh rugby. So some big brands around the world. But anyway, my point was we were in survival mode. So maybe 10 years later, we were connecting with a lady called Sanette, who was helping us with our trust, with our structures and our business structures and that kind of thing. And she wasn't connected to the film industry at all. But she knew our passion. She'd been watching the journey of our business over many years, and she knew our passion to tell our story on David. And so the one day she was just saying to me, Phil, what do you need to get going? And I think if I remember correctly, her and I were chatting about the story of the loaves and fishes. And I said to her, look, I think we just need a demo, like a 5-minute piece of animation to show that, because human animation is really hard, Brett. And we wanted to make this movie, by the way, I'll say this now, at the same level as movies like Tangled, Frozen. It was a genuine goal of us to hit it out the park. And so what I was saying to her at the time was, look, I think we need someone to fund us to get a little demo out, because that'll prove we can do it. Like, it's all very well to say, I want to make a movie on David, but can you actually do it? So, and I actually wasn't pitching to her to get involved at all, but she went away and through an incredible experience came back and said, God speaking to her and saying, Sinead, you must fund this demo. And she honestly didn't have the money at the time, but she just felt that's what she should do. So she stepped out in faith. She actually heard an audible voice, Brett, which was quite amazing.
Wow. That's quite rare.
That's very rare. And I mean, I've never personally had that, but I think it needed an audible voice, because this is kind of crazy territory we're going into. So she did step out and she did fund the demo. And that was the the start again of the David, or really the beginning of the David movie kicking off and moving forwards. Yeah. And that demo
funding a demo in the animated world. I mean, I know I've had friends who worked at Pixar and other places and DreamWorks and so forth. 5-minute demo. Are you talking about $1 million a minute sort of thing? Is that
So Judge, that's a great question. Just to give you an idea of animation costs, typically it's freely on Google, you can go look, but animated feature films are $150 million and north. So they typically, what you just said there, Brett, $1 million per minute and more. Yeah. So we did that demo for just under $3 million. So it was 5 minutes, just under $3 million. Your problem is also your first 5 minutes is always typically your most expensive because you're building the characters, the world. So you kind of get, but even that we were a lot cheaper than Disney, for example. But that's why it was extremely high risk, because you're putting a lot of money into a demo in the hope that you can take those loaves and fishes and somehow multiply them.
So for somebody stupid like me, it's like it's saying, I want to do a model house in Lego. And you say, awesome. Okay, but you're going to need to build little blocks. You're going to have to build little windows. You're going to have to build little roof pieces. You're going to have to do all of those things just to do the demo. And then you might never do anything again.
Yeah. So that's the big challenge, because you're setting up the whole world. You're building the whole, well, not the whole, because you're not all the characters, but effectively you've gone a long way. Yeah. And as you say, if you're not successful with that demo, that's the end. So
And so looking behind you over there, I see some sketches and so forth.
I'm actually in the David art room at our studio. So there's some artwork behind me.
Yeah. And is that part of your building blocks and your storyboarding?
Yeah. So quickly after the demo, we went into a thing what we're now calling chapter 2, which was chapter 1 was the demo, chapter 2 is the next phase. And again, through relationships with Sunette and some people she brought to the table, we went into the chapter 2 phase, Brett, which was about what it was, a $19.6 million phase, which sounds crazy. I'll quickly say, to give you an overcap so I can come rewind and answer your question, though, that our budget for the David film was $55 million. The 19.6 included the demo. So it was more like just over $15 million for chapter 2. So chapter 1 and 2 together was 19.6. Okay. What we did in chapter 2, if I can use like a word picture for you, it's like a construction building site. And when you go into a construction building site, you see a lot of cranes and a lot of dirt, a lot of rubble. And when you're building a foundation, that's what you do in a movie. And you've got to build a deep foundation if it's going to hold the actual production you're aiming to make. And obviously, if your production is not a big one, you can have a shallower foundation. But if you're trying to build a feature film like Tangled or Frozen, your foundation's got to be deep in every way. So what we did in chapter 2 was a lot of things. We did, firstly, a lot of research trips to Israel. We actually had 4 trips to Israel. We went with some of the world's leading archaeologists. So we really want the movie to be authentic and to breathe authenticity. So that was one side of chapter 2. We did script development. And by the way, Brett, we did 3 drafts of the script and then we storyboarded the script 3 times. So we got to like the 3rd time. We had some guys out of interest on our team who worked at Pixar, and they were saying for a Pixar movie, you often go up to 6 or 7 reiterations of the script and storyboarding. So we've still got a few of those to go, which we'll get to as we talk. But at the end of chapter 2, we'd gone as far as 3. We also built our technology, our pipeline, our technical foundation. We did all our character development, because this world is huge. You've got so many characters and so many different civilizations. So we built all our character design and we did all our environment design. So what you see behind me on the wall was a sample of about 800 to 1,000 beautiful environment pieces of art. And behind those 800 to 1,000 is a lot of work. Those are the ones that came forward. What you're seeing behind me is like a bit of, like this one behind me, you can see David sitting on the rock. There's a sunrise, and you can maybe just see the lion's head in the rock there. And we worked with this incredible group of artists. But I'll go down a rabbit warren. Let me finish what we did in chapter 2. And then we also developed a lot of the music in chapter 2. So it was research and development, script, storyboarding, music, environment development, character development. And that was the foundation to go into what I'd call production. So in movie terms, you might call that pre-production, but it's are producing things, but it's pre-production. And now it's the next phase is actually now you start to lay the bricks on top of the foundation.
So Phil, when you say music, it's just like you and your buddies with a guitar in the back room, or is it a more complicated than that?
If it was me with a guitar, it would not it'd be a problem. No, so it's so firstly with music, Brett, like everything we're doing, we're passionate about quality.
Yeah.
So I will say one thing about David, as we know, he wrote half the songs. So what's beautiful about the story is that he's authentically musical. And I love saying this is like if The Greatest Showman is a movie done on P.T. Barnum's life, and it's a great musical, we've got to be able to make an amazing musical when it comes to David. You know, it's like we're sitting in such great raw material. So no, in the music development stage, we worked with quite a lot of people, but the main person we worked with is a guy called Jonas Myron, and he's an incredible songwriter. He's a Swedish, born in Sweden, but lives in Los Angeles. He's done beautiful work for Andre Bocelli, Celine Dion, Barbra Streisand, but also many others. And what I liked about Jonas was the palettes that he's written for. He's also written a lot of music for the Christian community. Like he's one of the writers behind 10,000 Reasons, 10,000 Reasons, and so he's got an understanding of the spiritual journey that David was going through. He's also got a really good palette when it comes to the craft. He's one of the best in the world when it comes to songwriting. So with him, he came on trips to Israel with us. We probably wrote, not probably, we did, him primarily, wrote over 20 songs. And not that all of them will go into the movie, but they're creating a palette. It's a bit like this artwork behind me.
Right.
For us to feel the music. We also met with Israeli musicians.
Yeah.
And we got to know local musicians, and we started to understand because we want to weave that kind of feeling into the music as well. So yeah, it was definitely not just me and a few buddies. It was
this is orchestra quality stuff, full on.
Yeah. And in fact, Brett, the one thing just to talk about the David demo, for example, which hopefully I can give people a link at the end, they could go watch it. But that demo, when you listen, we actually got the Budapest Orchestra to do the orchestration behind that demo, which is amazing. And the song in that demo is the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew. So if anyone does get as far as getting to the demo and watching it, that's just listen out for that whole, because that was the Budapest Orchestra just for that demo.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Great. And so it's fantastic because you've got, I know historically people have spoken about David as, you know, a worshiper, a warrior, a king, a shepherd, and so on. And and there's books of that title. And I love David. I was speaking at a conference recently, and I asked the people, what is more important when you're hiring somebody, character or competence? And everybody said character. And then I took them to Psalm 72, where it talks about, and David led them with skillful hands and integrity of heart. And you've got this lovely combination of competence and character. And he was such a well-rounded person. Sure, he had flaws, but such a well-rounded person from a artistic, from his actual everyday work as a shepherd, and then becoming shepherd of the nation, because the scripture says God took him from being the shepherd of the sheep and made him the shepherd of a nation. Just such a lovely thing. So it's great to have such a rich character to make a movie. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to segue off what you were saying there, and I'll come back to David, Brett, but you were talking about that's like skillfully, so character and competency.
Yeah.
The one thing we're very passionate about as we build a team, we talk about hiring the right person. So do they tick all the boxes for competency? And then do they tick the box for character and the right DNA? So we've got a very rigorous process when we go through interviewing people, because you really want the best of the best working on this project, but you want the best of the best character-wise as well, you know, in terms of team spirit. So I love that what you're saying about David, because we with the David movie, one thing I don't love is there's so many bad Christian movies, if I can be blunt, Brett. The one thing we really want to build, and there are some great ones as well, but one thing we really want to build is a really beautifully crafted feature film that stands proudly alongside any movie in the world. Yeah. So just to talk about that craftsmanship, that's one thing we're passionate about. Yeah.
So you've seen the craftsmanship in the music, in the artwork, in the storytelling, in the animation, and it's a lot of work to do the animation.
Yeah.
So Phil, how's the demo been received? You've got this, you've poured 3 million into it. You've been, you know, from the empty container, you've spent 10 years paying school fees and surviving. It's going through your own desert and so on. And by the way, I mean, Jesus' desert wasn't 40 days for anybody who's listening. From my perspective, in the Convergence book, I write about the 7 seasons you have to go through. And one is the University of the Desert. It's just what happens. And I think the desert is the time you know what God's called you to do, and before people see it publicly. That's what it is. And so yeah, my view is the more gifted you are, the longer the desert. So it's good that you weren't 3 months in. We wouldn't be trusting you with a movie, Phil. So that's fantastic, Yeah. So I think Jesus knew at 12 years old. He knew who he was when he went to the temple, but he had to wait another 18 years, Yeah, amazing stuff. Okay. So
the question on the demo.
So go back to the demo. How was it received? Yeah.
So it's been amazing, Brett, because what the demo sparked is 2 things. Firstly, it sparked the next over $50 million investment, because they're like, the people who invested are like, oh my goodness, this really does cut it. So we're happy to support this movie on the basis of the demo. So the one thing it showed was, so that triggered that. The other thing the demo triggered, and maybe I should jump into that, because at the end of chapter 2, we were like, again, hitting a bit of there's still a mountain to climb. It honestly feels, if I can say, often I think one thing I say, Brett, is when God gives you a calling, like we're trying to make a movie on David, sometimes it feels like we're living the David versus Goliath scene. So I'll just say that's another peril that I find often in life, is like, you get called to do something and then you actually have to live it out. So why I'm mentioning that is because trying to take on a movie as an independent animated studio, it is a bit like David versus Goliath, to be honest. Yeah. So at the end of chapter 2, we were at a bit of a, like, okay, God, like, where are we going to get all these loaves and fishes to feed all these people, to resource this movie? It was that at that time, and I'm going to answer your question because the demo played a role in this, that we formed a relationship with the guys from Angel Studios, who are the studio behind The Chosen. Right. And they saw the demo, and on the basis of the demo, they were like, wow, this is really amazing. So they flew out to Cape Town, all the way from Utah. We spent 10 days to 12 days together here and really connected. And they were like, we really feel that there's something here with the demo. They ran it through a jury test. They have a jury test. They take what they call a torch, which in our case was our demo. They put it to the jury, and they say, this comes from a thing called the Sean Ellis test, Brett, which is interesting, just to quickly talk you through it. Yeah. Because the Sean Ellis test was done with Slack, which is a software program many of us will know. Yeah. And I think it was in 2015. People can Google it. He asked the users, if I took Slack away, would you be very disappointed, just disappointed, or you don't care? And Slack scored on, I think it was 51% very disappointed, maybe 30-something% were disappointed, and then like 10-ish% don't care. He said, on the basis of this is going to be $1 billion company. So what the Angel guys do is they take your torch or your demo, they put it to the jury and say, would you be very disappointed if this is not made? Would you be disappointed, or you don't care? And the David demo, I think, got the best results they've ever had. I could stand to be corrected, but that's how I remember it or understand it. And it was like over 60% said be very disappointed. I think it was like 36% said disappointed. Only 4% said they wouldn't care if the David movie wasn't made. So on the basis of that Sean Ellis test, they were like, okay, we're behind this movie. Let's go to crowdfunding. So for people who are not on this podcast, do you want me to quickly unpack the crowdfunding? Okay. Sure. So then you take the demo, and on the Angel Studios website, we place the demo and we go to a crowdfunding raise. And in the US, you can only raise $5 million cap without ACC approval. So at the end of last year, Brett, we did our first crowdfunding raise for $5 million. And what was amazing was that in 30 days, we raised $5 million for the David movie. So we've now got our next $5 million. What we're currently doing, and I'll go back to crowdfunding, and why I'm so passionate about it, is we're in a pledging phase now, testing the waters phase, and we're hoping to do another crowdfunding raise in August this year, where we start to go for the $30 million that's still outstanding. So it was $35 million we still had to raise, so we've done 5, there's still 30 to go. Right. So we're going to go to the crowdfunding in August at the end of this year. But what's beautiful about crowdfunding and what's been borne out by The Chosen is when you're building the crowd, you're actually building your community. Right. And I know, Brett, you deeply into understanding communities and how they work and how they function. I mean, it's one of your callings in life. But I'm pretty new to understanding. But the power of watching community and what it's done for The Chosen, I was like, wow, there's something here, because you're not relying on a Hollywood executive maybe two buyers who've got their own opinion, said, no, this movie should get greenlit or it should not get greenlit. You're relying on, basically, people are saying, by bringing their dollars and investing and becoming a shareholder, we want in on this, we want to see this movie made. But then they become your partner and they're passionate about the movie. And so it speaks to marketing as well as financing the movie. And that's why I'm so excited about this, because we actually did have some studios interested in David, Brett. But we decided this was a better route to go, because also this route, we say the creative head of the project, whereas sometimes if you go down the studio route, you become the tail because they're financing it. And what I didn't want to end up with, to be honest, was a movie like the Ridley Scott Noah movie, which I felt just drifted so far from what the Bible talked about. Yes, you've got to be entertaining, but you've also got to stay grounded in what God has said and done. So anyway, the crowdfunding, I'm giving you a whole lot of positives of the crowdfunding route, but that's another thing, is the creative leadership can stay intact. You're building a crowd that will also take you on into the marketing and the distribution of the film as well.
Parallel to the life of David, which I know you know, but so David gets anointed by Samuel, and then he's like banned on the run, right? So he's running away from Saul. Saul waxes hot and cold about whether he likes him or whether he wants to kill him. Generally leans towards killing him. But during that time, anybody who's discontented, in debt, all of the down and outs gravitate towards David because they sense God's presence there. People are attracted to the presence of God, and they know God's presence is with David, even though he's living in caves and living in foreign lands and all of that stuff, right? And so David is building his own crowd in a time of opposition. And if you had a donor, somebody give you a check for 60 million 3 years ago, you would have no crowd.
That's true.
And so it's an interesting parallel. Even the process of making this is similar to the life of David. And so that's fascinating. And as you've hinted at, big problem in movie making is your first film, the distribution, right? And how do you deal with that? And so the crowd is giving you hints of the possibilities on the distribution side, it seems.
Big time. I quickly wanted to cue into what you're saying, but you're so good, Brett, and maybe we can go back to distribution, but very quickly, it's amazing because when you study David's life, so many of his mighty men came out of that wilderness experience. And I find that an incredible leadership thing because, like you said, everyone was in debt, distress, running from the law, gathered to David, and he turns them into this incredible group, which is like, wow, as a leader, that thing of extreme ownership, you need to own your, like, if people are not going somewhere, you as the leader need to look at yourself and say, like, extreme ownership, because he formed an incredible group from a, rough and ready raw material of people, which is amazing. Another thing I love about, I'm going to go on a slight rabbit hole, but quickly want to say it. What I love about David, because it reflects God's character, something about leadership. That scene where there's three men, he's in the desert, he's in exile and they hear him say, I wish I could have water from the well in Bethlehem.
Right.
So that was taken over by the Philistines. As the Philistine garrison controls Bethlehem, they fight their way through the Philistine garrison, draw him water, bring him back water without him even asking.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's incredible leadership, because they must have loved David. He must have done something for them. It reminds me of that verse, we love because he first loved us.
Right.
When God captures our hearts, we'll do anything for him, because it's not law, it's not religion. It's because he's captured our heart. And what I struck about David was he must have done something for those guys, that they loved him and felt accepted by David, that they'd go and do that for him. And I was thinking that's an incredible thing about leadership, which I hope comes out in the film as well, Brett, is it's just such a good example of leadership, but mainly it speaks to God's heart for me. How much we love because he first loved us.
Wonderful. So Phil, got the demo done. You've got the next, you've got up to nearly 20 million. Now you've crowdfunded, so you're at about 24.5 million if the math is right. So you've got about 30 million to go, and you're asking for interest right now. And what types of people can invest? Because this is an investment. It's not, some people can make a donation, right? They can say, sounds like a charitable cause. I want to give $100,000 or $1 million or $1,000. That they can do that and get a tax write-off. And others can say, man, this Phil guy is a businessman and he's making a movie, and I want to invest. I want to be part of this for the ongoing thing. So people can do both, right?
Correct. Yeah. So just to say on that, Brett, there's two ways people can invest. The one is through the crowd mechanism when we go back to our next round, which will probably be in August. And there anyone can invest. As long as they're sitting currently, as long as they're in the USA, unfortunately. We are trying to work out a mechanism where people from outside the USA can invest as well. Yeah. But there anyone can invest from $100 upwards. So and the place where people can go on that is a place called angel.com/David. And there's lots of information there. But that's where the crowd would invest. There's also open between now and then, like accredited investors in the US or outside the US can also invest through a 506c mechanism. So as long as they're accredited, we can take on investment. So there are a few guys who actually in this gap between December's crowdfunding and August, we've already had 3 people invest. One guy put in 500,000 and there was 2 smaller amounts, I think of 200 and 100 or 100 and 100 or something like that. So there is room in the interim between now and August for people who'd like to invest. As long as they're accredited investors, they can invest. If you're not an accredited investor, then you'd need to wait until the crowdfunding raise in August, and then it's open to anyone. And as you say, Brett, people are becoming genuine shareholders in the David company, which we've called Slingshot USA LLC. And they become genuine shareholders in that company and go along like in the chosen for the journey.
So if you're in the US, you're an accredited investor, you can invest in Slingshot USA. You'll end up investing in, and if you're not an accredited investor and you're saying, I still want to be passionate about this, just you can pledge so long. You can wait for the next round. People, if you pledge, your name will get in there. People will get back to you with an email and say, hey, the pledge is open. You can now spend $100, $500, whatever you want to do. And that you can be part of the story. It's contribute your stone to the fight with the giant.
And then when people who pledge, they get first option. When we do open the crowdfunding, the people who pledge get first bite at actually investing. And then we open it up again to anyone else after that.
Because as you pointed out earlier, there are caps on how much you can take from the crowd. So if somebody comes and the 5 million round is closed, it's closed at that point.
There's one thing I'd like to say about investing, Brett, is going back to my mom. She was talking to me. So yes, this is exciting. But the one thing I want to say is that behind investment, she was talking to you about Hudson Taylor and his mission organization to China. And all the other missionary societies at the time were saying, we promise you, we'll take care of your kids' school fees and medical aid and everything. And Hudson Taylor's call was, I promise you 2 things. I promise you death and I promise you malaria, but I promise you a chance to preach the gospel. And I thought, and then his missionary society grew the strongest because I think what's interesting as we talk about investment is like, the film industry is very risky. It's a very risky industry. And this is in particular, we are trying to fight a giant. So, I mean, typical in business, high risk, potentially high reward, obviously, but it is high risk and it could be high reward. But what I'm more interested in and wanted to say quickly, Brett, was that spiritual reason. Why am I investing in this? And I think that's the thing, because at our studio, as you come up the stairs, we've got a saying from Lord of the Rings by Gimli the dwarf, which says, certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for? So I think that's almost the spirit of this project. It's like, we're going to take on a giant. And you don't want to try and sugarcoat that, or, that's the journey this is. It's taking on giants. And I really believe in what we're doing, and I believe we're going to take, like David didn't say to Goliath, I think I'm going to beat you today, So I believe, but I just wanted to say that's the journey we're on.
Well, Phil, it's great to hear that you've paddled the Zambezi, you've seen a few hippos and crocs, and you've survived. You've been out there, you've killed a few squirrels and wolves and lions and bears on the way. And you've earned your stripes, you and your team, and Jackie and the team, in terms of proving that you can actually do animation. You've done a great quality demo and built some good relationships, and there's a community of people. A crowd sounds impersonal, but there's a community of people who are becoming part of your extended spiritual army, financial army, And we know that to do these things involves spiritual capital, intellectual capital, creative capital, social capital, and financial capital. It takes all forms of capital to bring down giants. And so we want to just pray a blessing on you, on the studio. I'm reminded of the verse, Nathaniel, the guileless guy, can anything good come out of a Galilee type of situation? And here you are, a studio at the southern tip of Africa, doing quality work that's taking on things in the domain of what's just happened traditionally in Hollywood and in California. So blessings to you on this. Any final thoughts from you, if you would have just any final inspiration that you might want to say to people who are listening to this?
No, the only final thing I'd just like to say is our passion is Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and life. And this movie is being made to point people towards Jesus. And we want to make it highly entertaining so that anyone around the world can watch it and enjoy it. And it must give people an on-ramp. But I believe it's going to be so captivating and so meaningful that it will draw people down that road. But yeah, our goal is to not make a Sunday school lesson. It's to have a great piece of entertainment, but that really points people in that direction. Yeah.
So through David, you point backwards to the heart of God, but forward to
Jesus,
the King. And amazing. And I know your dreams, Phil, is for this to get into high schools, to get into the mainstream, to get into Broadway, to get into comic books, to get into all sorts of things, that this is going to be something that becomes a bit of a movement to capture the heart of people with the heart of God.
Yeah, we didn't get time to unpack all that, but you've kind of summarized it beautifully. Yeah, Brett, our heart is definitely for to go beyond just the movie into a Broadway musical and into other aspects, and even give birth to other movies like a movie on Esther, for example. And so there's a lot more to it than just the David movie.
Yeah, fantastic. So for those who are listening to this, what we're going to do now is we're going to attach a clip of the demo so you can see it. Phil, we didn't talk much about, does this take David from birth to death, or just tell us quickly which part and then which part the demo covers?
Oh, wonderful. So there's two timings we should talk about very quickly. I'll get onto that part, which I was, but very quickly, to give people a sense of an animated feature film, Brett, it typically takes 4 to 7 years to make an animated feature film. We're well into the journey. If we carry on with our financing without a break, should be on schedule to finish the movie end of 24 and release the movie 2025. But I'll go back to your question, because sometimes people don't understand how long an animated feature film takes to make. And I'll say one thing, it's like an apple orchard. You got to water and fertilize an apple orchard for 5 years. You don't see a single apple. But then when they do start giving apples, you see apples for 20 years. And that describes animation pretty well. It's a long journey, but then once you get apples, like Lion King breathes on and lives on to this very day, decades later. David's life, the demo is young David as a shepherd boy. We see this scene with him. And that's where our movie starts, is like young David as a shepherd boy. It goes through with him killing Goliath about a third of the way through the movie, and it goes on to where he becomes king of Judah. So that's the span it carries. And Brett, if we've got 1 more minute, can I quickly talk about the 5 shorts as well?
Oh yeah, please do. I'd love to hear about this, because I think that's really, really important. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but yeah.
So we're working with a wonderful group of people in the US called Go Minnow, which is a Christian streaming service, but we've partnered with them. And together with them, we're making 5 David shorts, which is young David. They're kind of prequels, 5-minute shorts, prequels to the feature film. And we've given a theme to each short. So it's warrior, shepherd, poet, king, worshipper. And so it's just those different attributes of David, those different attributes of God. We're in production of those. And that IP sits in the Slingshot USA company already. But I'm really excited about those, because they're going to form an amazing body of work and prequel to the feature film. And it's almost like the 5 stones when David went to fight Goliath. We've got these 5 gems, which I think are going to be beautiful.
And when will those come out streaming with Minnow?
So we're still looking at the release date. We'll finish production in kind of middle of 23. And then they'll come out second half of 23 and 24, in that period before the film comes out in 2025. So there'll be a lot of activity from David media point of view from end of 23, the whole of 24, and then the movie in 2025. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So you're not going to just disappear in a hole until 2025 and everybody forgets who Phil is.
Forgets, yeah. That's right.
Fantastic. Great. Well, Phil, thanks so much for sharing that. And we're going to go in and we'll go into the demo. We'll attach that here together with some links as to how they can go to Angel Studios and just track and get in the loop with what's going on with this. But thanks so much for sharing your story. I'm passionate about tackling giants. I think it's part of our mandate. And everybody, if we're following God, God will give us a giant to tackle. So this is going to be a great equipping for the people of faith as to how to do that, and a great case study example of working through it. So Phil, thanks for sharing your story generously. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, Brett.
Look into my eyes. Do you see fear? You come at me with sword and spear, but I come in the name of the God of Israel. Yes! Right between the eyes! Did you see that? Anyone? Of course not. Okay then, one more time. Tally, not now. I'm trying to protect us from this Philistine. Whoa. No, not that way. Come on. Back to your mom. Right, Philistine. Oh, wait. Right between the eyes. Oh, of course. That one you saw. Tally! Tally, no! I'm coming, girl! Whoa, easy! Shira! I will bring her home safely. Whoa! Tally, wait, no! There you go. I'm almost there. Okay. Oh! Tally, stop! No! Oh, that doesn't help. That does. Stop. Thank you. Yena חופר ינחני במגע לצדק למען